Academic pursuits, the gathering of hard intelligence, these are generally seen as noble. They are said to enrich the soul and the mind. This is true, but not infinitely. It is possible to trespass so far down the spiral of knowledge that we actually make ourselves less intelligent. Ralph Waldo Emerson was an American essayist, naturalist, and philosopher born in 1803. On August 31st, 1837, Emerson gave a speech at Harvard College called The American Scholar. In this speech, he simultaneously eviscerated and empowered the students to whom he spoke. Today, this speech proves to have been prophetic. The internet age has made Emerson's words perhaps horrifying in their relevance. He predicted a trap that the pursuit of knowledge represents to humanity, but thankfully he also provided a solution. We will come back to Emerson shortly. Certainly he is the main character in this story. But in 2006, Daniel C. Dennett wrote about a fictional game he called CHMES. This game, Dennett said, existed in the context of philosophy. I would suggest that it exists across all academic pursuits. The game of CHMES is played by professional academics. In this game, a series of rules are mutually agreed upon. These rules may be Plato's theories on this or that, Nietzsche's ideas about some other thing. One individual enters the game of CHMES. This happens in the form of papers, studies, or dissertations which are written about the agreed upon rules. Another player engages the first individual, publishing some other thing about how the first player's CHMES moves were either triumphant or embarrassing. The two players fancy themselves quite good at CHMES, and so they stick to it. The implications and applications of the rules are then debated, articulated, refined, and spun in circles. This goes on and on as more people enter the ongoing game, until we have a whole segment of individuals who have dedicated their lives to playing this game. But these people are doing just that. They are playing a game. They are not engaging with reality, with the reality that created the rules of CHMES. Instead, they are swirling around each other, hovering above the actual real world. The players are both parasites and producers, consuming the works of others and transmuting them into ostensibly new material. Everyone is citing everyone else. We no longer have any experts on how to do a thing, but instead experts on how to do responses to a thing, or how to do a thing about a thing, or what is the nature of how to do a thing. We stop asking how knowledge can be applied to life, but instead how it can be applied to other knowledge. The result is some bizarrely irrelevant, self-sustaining cesspool of highly applauded works. I have to ask, what use is all of this knowledge if its only context is within the self-contained circuit of other knowledge? Dennett argued that the game of CHMES basically represents the industry of academia, but in the internet era, the bulk of mankind's academia is now available to the layperson, in theory. So too is the game of CHMES. We sit around in front of our computers for hours consuming videos and papers, believing ourselves to be coming to conclusions on life. In reality, we are just coming to conclusions on conclusions. This type of knowledge is untested by any real-life application. I am no exception to this. In fact, I am as guilty of this practice as anyone, almost certainly more so. With each step down this spiral of academia, we tighten a set of blinders. We eat what we are fed, and we do not see what is not at the buffet. We close ourselves off to other sources of knowledge, those which have not been or cannot be recorded by so-called academic elites. Our desperate and well-intentioned search for intelligence results in us rejecting a huge segment of the world's wisdom. Our knowledge becomes an inside game, an inside joke even. It alienates us from the very material which it is said to concern. We know more, and somehow we know less. This is the trap which Emerson predicted in his speech. It is the one that he so eloquently eviscerated. Perhaps it may strike the listener as hypocritical to make a video which interprets Emerson's thoughts, but I believe by the end of this video that seeming paradox will be resolved. Long before Dennett, Emerson would have described the game of chess as living in a degenerate state. This was the phrase he used in American Scholar. It is a state of thinking without action. In the degenerate state, when the victim of society, he tends to become a mere thinker, or still worse, the parrot of other men's thinking. Emerson says that when we collectively exist in the degenerate state, our society puts a steel lid on itself. Under this lid, we find only flashy exertions of mechanical skill, academia for the sake of academia. This degenerate state cannot create progress, quite the opposite. To live in the degenerate state is to put a firm mark of completion upon man's experience in the world. A society in the degenerate state severs its pieces from its whole. The worker, the tradesman, are boxed into their roles. These people are not understood or even considered by anyone of true societal power. Their efforts are not really applauded, and their perspectives are not really considered. The individual, accordingly, resigns himself to this role. He becomes subject to his own toil, sectioned off from the rest of a society. The farmer becomes the hands, while the academic becomes the brains. But in reality, Emerson notes that a society is one body. We are all connected. The hands are worthless without the brain, and the brain, too, is worthless without the hands. Indeed, the antidote to this disconnection is connection. We must realize that we are all on this earth one being. Emerson notes that when our loved ones smile, we do too. When they weep, we weep. When others scream, we feel fear. So we are not petals and roots, but instead we are all just a plant. The roots are purposeless without a petal, and the petal dies without roots. Emerson notes the way to discover this oneness and to break down the walls of academia is to venture forth into the world, to exit the hallways of colleges and institutions. To find a more honest intelligence, we must act. We must put to work our hands and our senses beyond the safe confines of formal scholarly pursuits. Emerson did not make his speech to rip apart the idea of intellectualism or scholarship, but instead to right a wrong, to inspire a mutation within the idea of being intelligent. He saw America as being on a precipice. It was time to unlock the handcuffs of previous generations and create within America a new mode of intelligence, a new identity of learning. The change Emerson championed he referred to as man thinking. This type of intelligence represented not a lazy exchange of theories, not a game of chess, but a duty to cheer, raise, and guide one another by showing facts. Not the appearances painted by academia, but facts that were active and present in the living world. In this effort, man thinking would simply work without need for acclaim. Often, Emerson said, man thinking will play the role of the idiot. As he learns and discovers new things in the real world, he will be confronted by his own ignorance. It will be embarrassing, and it will result in admonishment rather than praise. The learned men of yesterday will look at him derisively as he stammers and stutters. Man thinking's language will take the form of questions rather than answers. He will stand off in society, but that is fine. Instead of fetishizing appearances and decorum, the role of the intelligent man is to look inward. He competes only for his own respect, which is the highest honor that man can achieve in this world. In doing so, he learns not what the world appears to be. He learns not what academics have proclaimed it to be. Instead, he gains an intimate understanding of the world as he experiences it, as it is. He feels the salt of the sea not by reading about it in a book, but by plunging himself into the ocean. Emerson also posits that by looking inward, we truly learn more about those around us. He reminds us that we are all connected. We are all fingers on the same hand. He points to great works of creative achievement. So often they resonate with us because they betray sentiments or truths we already know but have kept private for fear of estrangement. The man thinking can communicate and confess these conclusions, and this boldness leads him to greatness. Often, Emerson notes, the more private our thoughts, the more universal they truly are. In today's world, we have branded this phenomenon loosely as authenticity. So many creative works impact us because they are received as being authentic. Emerson's man thinking faces fear. He inspects its origin, not the academia which it has produced. Fear is born from ignorance, so in learning from the world, we become more brave. Emerson says that we are too often like an ostrich, plunging our heads into the ground. Sure, it is safer in the ground, but it is not a life well lived. We cannot smell the flowers. We cannot hear the birds singing. This is no sort of life. It is no sort of intelligence to know only the dirt around our face. The world as we see it is full of pretense. We are told so much about reality that it can be tempting to take all of this pretense as truth because of obligation to custom, our own timidness, or simple laziness. But Emerson tells us the world is his who can see through its pretension. Our image of the world may be a lie, and when we see it as such, we have dealt the mortal blow already. Emerson says we should not find intelligence only through the written works of others, but instead we must go to the source. We must find raw material through our intellect alone, which is unique and brand new. We can mold this raw material into intelligence. We must meet people. Emerson notes that life provides the cobblestones and we are the masons. When we talk to people outside of our typical boundaries, we collect these stones. Through craft, be it writing, thinking, painting, or even passive reception, we can turn these stones into beautiful monuments. In one particularly striking passage, Emerson describes how actions become beautiful, how reality becomes knowledge. We dwell on our experiences for some time, often long before they carry any particular meaning. Our memories, when the time is right, detach themselves from the material world like a ripened fruit. These memories become beautiful, insightful in their own right. At this point, our experience becomes knowledge. Our actions begin as insects, but change in time into soaring butterflies that are so dynamic and so beautiful that the act of recording them can only diminish their impact. Academic study can only copy this metamorphosis, can provide facsimiles of our own ability. It can copy the work of reality at best. The words of another will always pale next to the actions of ourselves. As we seek truth in academia, we attempt to transplant an oak into a flower pot. We take pictures of the dove, wondering why we cannot hear its song. Reality is a resource which can never be matched by academia. Books, scholarly materials, these things are finite. We may regurgitate and republish work forever, but it is still finite. Emerson points to craftsmen who spend so much time carving their wares that one day they wake up to see that there are no pine trees left. We can also see when this happens. It is clear and it is painful. We can see these so-called debates, which serve no value besides some falsely academic form of entertainment. We can find dissertations on dissertations. Meanwhile, flowers bloom new each spring. Waves crash every day. The seasons come and go into eternity. Emerson tells us that we have always the resource of life. Scholars lose their hours as they work, and the rest of us gain hours as we live. This can happen on scales both large and small. The society runs weak on an empty tank of intelligence. The artist may lose inspiration to paint, having seen every piece of art that he can. But the man who lives will lose nothing at all. As we look at humanity from so far away, from offices and from classrooms and from computer screens, the populations of the world have become herds or masses. As Emerson notes, their value has congealed into some monolith in which each is nearly indistinguishable from one another. Perhaps this has some utility in broad public measures or policy making, but this tendency creates subjugation. Emerson points to the low who exalt the glory of their chief. They accept their status as part of a herd or as a footnote in the novel of some other individual. They allow their own wants and needs to perish in the interests of their leader. Emerson says these people sun themselves in the light of a great man, believing it to be their own element. People believe he lives for us, and we live in him. But this is a lie, and if we venture forward into the world, we can dissolve the herd. We can see not only the flock, but each lamb and all of its unique beauty. We become open to the voices of the individual, not of the institution. And indeed, this experience is our true nourishment. Emerson notes that the man has never lived that can feed us ever. The same can be said for institutions, for colleges, for books, for the spiral of academia. For a pool which seems so infinitely deep, the world of academia provides us with remarkably limited nourishment. It can only pretend to do for the individual what experience can truly fulfill. The halls of institution promise the proliferation of knowledge. I see this as an abundantly false promise. In truth, they have built a guarded fort around knowledge. The guards at the gate take the forms of money, status, and, bizarrely, intelligence. It's no secret that college in this country is prohibitively expensive. This is a betrayal of students, society, and knowledge itself. For this alone, these institutions should be ashamed of themselves. The deans and presidents of these places should know only embarrassment. In the mirror, they should see only greed. The systems of application and admission also ensure that colleges largely accept individuals of status rather than produce them. Without being born into a significant set of advantages, financial or otherwise, it is tremendously unlikely for an individual to achieve any higher education. Certainly there are exceptions to this, scholarships, grants, etc., awarded to the hardest working students, but these must be recognized as cruelty, not benevolence. These programs are clunky and even Kafkaesque. Why must students compete and toil to be treated with a modicum of decency? Why should the exploitation of youth be the default state for higher education? Do we applaud the father who beats only 5 of his 6 children? To be admitted into college, an individual generally must be able to thrive in formal academic settings. This highly focused and specific ability can be called academic capability. But institutions like colleges have taken this academic capability to be the same thing as intelligence. Certainly anyone who has gone into the world would realize how incorrect this is. A person doesn't need to have academic capability to offer wisdom, but institutions have locked this entire genre of thought out of their halls. So with their vast expanse of knowledge, academic institutions offer only one segment of the wisdom that the world has on offer. These places are full of the academically capable, not necessarily the intelligent. So what is this genre of intelligence that institutions find so uninteresting? It is tempting to consider this idea of going out into the world as traveling to faraway places and distant locales. That would be a mistake. Instead, as Emerson notes, we must sit at the feet of the familiar. We must learn the insight of the commonplace, of songs in the streets, of the breeze through the meadows, of things which are not found in the fortress of academic pursuit. Only then can we understand the world in which we live rather than the picture of it we have chosen to accept. Simple things have meaning, as Emerson says. A drop is an ocean. The pleasing is the sublime. The decent is the beautiful. Perhaps one may be able to live their whole life studying academia and even making a decent salary for the work. Perhaps they can live happily in the world created by these academic pursuits. But when that individual lies on their deathbed, they must realize the world they have lived in is a fiction. It is missing pieces. It is a cabin that is missing a wall. And then, with death, it is, of course, far too late to build that wall. Certainly no reasonable person would declare that we should abolish all academic pursuits, that these things have no purpose. Indeed, Emerson notes that the human mind is nourished by knowledge. For a long time, history's greatest individuals had nothing but the printed page, and history produced a lot of great people. But Emerson points to the idea of creative reading. He says that just as there is creative writing, there too exists creative reading. In this pursuit, Emerson basically encourages a type of selective reading. Find things of value in books, meditate on them, and discard those which do not provide you value, and then move on. Furthermore, Emerson notes that there is a vast volume of information which can only be communicated through formal academia. He points to exact science as an example. Going out into the world would be a poor way to learn brain surgery. Watching wind in the trees will not teach you how Caesar conquered Gaul. Colleges, in this way, are indispensable institutions for teaching this information. But they should aim not only to teach, they must aim to create. Emerson says they can only highly serve us when they aim not to drill but to create, when they gather from far every ray of various genius to their hospitable halls, and by the concentrated fires set the hearts of their youth on flame. Emerson followed these words with a prophecy that today has proven to be resoundingly true. Forget this, and our American colleges will recede in their public importance, whilst they grow richer every year. Today, degrees have never been more useless. Colleges have never been more profitable. So academic pursuits, of course, have their utility, and that utility can exist in many ways, whether that is relaying technical information or potentially inspiring a new generation of thinkers. But we should avoid academia for academia's sake. As a writer, of course, Emerson held a great love for literature. Indeed, in this speech, he professes that books are the best of things. But he cautioned strongly that when books were abused, they became the worst of things. In a surprisingly casual turn of phrase, Emerson singles out the idea of the bookworm. He notes that this book-learned class turn literature into some type of third dominion, some force that is neither part of the world nor the human soul. In this way, the power of the written word becomes stripped from any context. What purpose does a book serve if not the world or the soul? Emerson notes that books must inspire, not transmute. If we allow books to destroy our individual thought and action, we are better to not have read anything. He says that the abuse of books turns men from systems into satellites. He cautions against letting a book deactivate your soul. The active soul is the one thing of worth that all humans are entitled to. The active soul is genius, which lies inside all of us in one way or another. The man who cannot write a song is perhaps a genius carpenter. The man who cannot build a bench is perhaps a genius musician. There were bound to be yet discovered versions of this brilliance. The book, the college, the school, the institution, Emerson believed these things stopped with the past utterance of genius. They established standards and stuck to those standards. But truly creative actions, manners, and words, true genius, are not indicative of any custom or authority. They do not prescribe to some established standard. They are produced uniquely and spontaneously in one's own mind. So institutions resting on insular standards and criteria were unlikely to produce or even recognize true genius. The mind, Emerson notes, cannot always see the way forward. And so we can use books to illuminate our path. But we should take this assistance with reflection, solitude, and thought, not blind acquiescence. Books should be for idle time. They must not interrupt or take the place of thought. There exist moments in life in which we can see the world so clearly. These moments, Emerson says, are far too precious to be wasted in other men's transcripts of their readings. Emerson was speaking about formal academia, but now in the 21st century we are all inundated with chances to learn. The issues he talked about now apply to everyone. I once thought the internet could be defined as the sum of all of man's knowledge, made easily accessible. If you want to know something, look online and the answer will be there. I now believe this to be false. In time, or today, the internet may contain every piece of hard knowledge man has ever produced, but it will still not contain a summer night's breeze or a butterfly landing on the finger. Glory and suffering and all of their insight, these things require experience. They require excursion. The world may not always be enjoyable, but it is always real, and for that, it is always sublime. Academia is important. Learning is critical. But we must not substitute learning for doing, or we will surely miss out on so much that our world has to offer. Today, with the world's information at our fingertips, making good on this ideal is profoundly difficult. But we must remember, there exists a vast expanse between what is difficult and what is impossible.